my intervention will be a very easy, a very simple intervention. Takes as its starting point the UNESCO latest report on the futures of education, and I emphasize the word futures in the plural because the International Commission, to whom I belong also to this Commission, wants to avoid the idea that we need to anticipate the future, this kind of futuristic vision that is so popular nowadays, insisting on the existence of a plurality of futures. And one of the most brilliant members of this Commission, indeed one of the most brilliant intellectuals of our times, Arjun Happadurai, explains well this position of the International Commission on discussing about the futures of education, and I'm quoting Happadurai. We need to use education to get abreast of the curve of uncertainty, rather than to pick up the pieces after the damage is done. Education can help us to design our own transformations, rather than to simply react to transformations that are imposed upon us. To make education the midwife of multiple futures, we may need to embrace uncertainty rather than to try to suppress or avoid it. This was, in a sense, the position, the attitude of the International Commission in writing this report. A report the whole report is based on a human rights approach. A human rights approach justified, of course, by the current situation of the world, by the fractures between human beings, and also the violences against the earth, against our common home. Throughout the report, which is in 9 chapters, throughout the report, but especially in chapter 5, the transformative work of teachers, special attention is given to teachers. Because the Commission believes that it will not be possible to overcome the difficult moment in education without a strong recognition and appreciation of teachers and their work. This is why the Commission, in the introduction of the report, strongly rejects all kinds of illusions and daydreams and futuristic visions that point to an education without schools, without teachers, that point to the idea of the ubiquity of education, that it's in all places, that it's on the digital, whatever. And so the Commission strongly rejects this kind of ideas, stating for the need to protect and to transform teachers and schools. In a sense, the report influenced the mottos, the main ideas of the World Teachers' Days in 22 and in 23. And I remember the motto of the World Teachers' Day of 22. The transformation of education begins with teachers. As you all know, this World Teachers' Day is organized by UNESCO, by UNICEF, by the International Labour Organization, and by Education International Education. And so it really influenced the idea of the World Teachers' Day in 22, but also the motto of the World Teachers' Day in 23, and I recall it: the teachers we need for the education we want. And the subtitle, the global imperative to reverse the teacher shortage, which is in a sense one of the main themes of your assembly here in Braga. In this line, I'm not anymore in the middle of these discussions, because I'm not anymore at UNESCO, but if I was in these discussions for the year 24, for the World Teachers' Day in 24, I would choose the motto for this year, and I would suggest the following motto because it goes with my intervention. Recovering the great humanistic mission of teachers. Recovering the great humanistic mission of teachers. That would be my suggestion for the year 24, but I'm not anymore in these discussions at UNESCO. And why to choose this motto? Because we need to underline the role of teachers in the defense and promotion of human rights, to draw attention to an education that, without denying cognitive dimensions, without denying social-emotional dimensions, without denying many other dimensions of teachers, insists on the humanistic mission of teachers. Dear friends, colleagues, as it was clear in this introduction, in this first presentation of your assembly, we are all aware of the difficult situations teachers are living in all over the world. The shortage of teachers, the devaluation of the profession, the lack of recognition. Maria Assunção Flores had presented it very well in the introduction of this assembly, as well as the ICET president in the words that they just give to us a couple of minutes before. It's a long list of problems and difficulties resulting from several decades of wrong policies with a progressive corruption, with a progressive erosion of the teaching profession during the last 30 years, 35 years. It is a situation that goes throughout the world, as Maria Assunção Flores just recalled. It goes throughout the world, from America to Asia to Europe to Africa. But the African reality, the reality in Africa, is particularly dramatic. And we need to put our attention in this continent, because we all know that the future of humanity will be mainly played in Africa. Obviously, as you can understand, it's impossible for me to cover the whole range of problems that were identified in your documents. Therefore, I will focus on only one issue, albeit a very important one, teacher education, as a kind of illustration of the problems experienced nowadays by the teaching profession. And in a very simple way, and I'm sorry from now, even too simplistic for a qualified audience like the one I'm addressing to, we can say that historically, it's very simplistic. Please keep it not like a kind of historical explanation, but more a way of building an argument. We can say that historically there have been two great revolutions in teacher education. Needless to say, this chronology that I'm presenting differs from country to country, from region, from the levels of education, from primary, from secondary teaching. But I'm not trying to build an historical argument. I'm not trying to build an historical explanation. I'm only trying to use this kind of historical introduction to build an argument. The first revolution is, of course, the creation of normal schools or similar institutions with this name or another name around the middle of the 19th century, and this revolution lasts almost 100 years, during which the normal schools, and I want to call your attention for this, the normal schools played an important role in teacher education, but also in the production of the teaching profession. Teaching associations, teaching methods, school press, textbooks, public policies, etc., etc. The most important aspect of this revolution was the proximity between teacher education and the profession. There was strong proximity between teacher education and the profession, between normal schools and school teachers. The teachers of the normal schools were themselves school teachers, and every process took place inside the same universe, the same context, the same atmosphere, the same professional atmosphere. Of course, we all know that the most negative aspect was the distance from the spaces of research and knowledge. Gradually, the normal schools became obsolete because they took on an increasingly technical and instrumental nature and they lost their ability to be central institutions for teaching professional development. Naturally, it was almost inevitable. Around the middle of the 20th century, and it depends on the chronology from one country to other country, normal schools were replaced by institutions of higher education, which was the second great revolution in teacher education. Our French colleagues invented a term to talk about this revolution, the universitarization of teacher education. It doesn't sound very well in English, but it's the term that is even l'universitisation de la formation des enseignants. This revolution, this second revolution, survived to this day, until today, with great advances in the second half of the 20th century, perhaps the golden age of teacher education. However, since the beginning of our century, weaknesses and dead hands have become more pronounced, namely due to a solution that somehow created a distance between university professors and school teachers, between university settings and school settings. Then, as we all know, so-called alternative models began to emerge, which in reality are not alternative at all, but rather correspond to a profound devaluation of teacher education, most of the time reduced to courses or seminars to train teachers in a few weeks. Let us remember, between many other programs and many other policies, the program Teach for America, now not only in America but all around the world, Teach for All, that causing profound damages of the idea of teacher education. At the same time, and not by chance, there are tendencies and discourses, ways of talking about teachers, supposedly modern and innovative, that tend to replace the term teacher by a series of other terms and names. Our Catalan colleague from Barcelona, Jorge La Rosa, has made a long list, and I'm only just quoting a small part of this list, a long list of names by which teachers are now called, trying to replace the term teachers by other terms, and has made a sharp critique of this discursive trend, writing, and I'm quoting Jorge La Rosa, a teacher is not a guru. A teacher is not an initiator. A teacher is not a mediator. A teacher is not a coach. A teacher is not a manager. A teacher is not a service provider. A teacher is not a father nor a mother. A teacher is not a companion. A teacher is not a friend. A teacher is not a leader. A teacher is not an activist. A teacher is not a spiritual counselor nor an emotional counselor. A teacher is not a conductor. A teacher is not a guide. A teacher is not a collaborator. A teacher is not an animator. A teacher is not a facilitator. And the list goes for 3 or 4 pages in the text and in the book of Jorge La Rosa. So, what is the teacher? He asked. And the answer is, by Jorge La Rosa, a teacher is a teacher. This provocation, because it's a provocation, in its apparent simplicity, explains well the erosion and undermining of the teaching profession, which is also linked to teacher education. And so about this second revolution, we can say exactly the opposite of what we have said about the first revolution. The most positive aspect is the proximity of research and knowledge spaces, the proximity of teacher education with other knowledge-based professions. The most negative aspect is the distance between teacher education and the profession, between university professors and school teachers, and teachers are no longer educated in a coherent professional universe, in a coherent professional context, milieu, or professional atmosphere. That's the reason why I'm calling now for a third revolution, the title of this keynote speech. A third revolution that seeks to bring together the positive aspects of the 2 previous revolutions, that is, the proximity between teacher education and the profession, and the proximity to research and knowledge. This third revolution, which has been defended by several authors, by many authors around the world, including people like Kenneth Zeitner and many others, involves, in my opinion, 3 movements. And these are the 3 movements that I want to share with you. First movement, valuing a third type of knowledge, teachers' professional knowledge. It is, in my opinion, the most important movement, recognizing, building, valuing teachers' professional knowledge. Of course, needless to say, scientific knowledge of the disciplines is very, very, very important. Of course, needless to say, curricular and didactic and pedagogical knowledge is also very, very, very important. But these 2 types of knowledge are not enough to educate a teacher. If they are not followed, if they are not at the same time accompanied by a third type of knowledge, the knowledge that is in the profession, the knowledge that belongs to the profession. It is true, we all know, and Maria Assunção Flores has written extensively about that, and many other people in this room, that there are an extensive literature on this third type of knowledge. And yet, it remains unknown and ignored, especially when it comes to programs of teacher education. Because it is experiential knowledge, yes, but it's not simply experiential. It is contingent, contextualized, singular knowledge that depends on a gesture, on a movement identical to that of the brilliant French philosopher Simone Weil from the beginning of the 20th century, when she wrote to his professor Alain, saying, it's not enough for me to know or to do something. I want to reflect on what I know and I do. The idea that it's not enough to know or to do something, even if we do it well, but we need to reflect. And that's why this teaches professional knowledge. It's also a collective knowledge, which is in the profession, which is in the collective, which implies, to use the term by Bruno Latour, the passage from cogito to cogitamos, from the idea of I cogito to we cogitamos. Above all, I want to stress this point, it is public knowledge. Knowledge that is publicly available. Not in the sense of publishing texts, of publishing papers, of publishing books, but in the sense of publication. Publication, public action. Public action, public actions that makes the profession known and recognized by the public. Known and recognized by the public. In my opinion, if we do not pay renewed attention to this third type of knowledge, and if we do not include it as one of the pillars of teacher education and teacher education programs, it will be difficult for us to reverse the current condition of teachers. The second movement is strengthening a third actor, teachers as educators of the new teachers. It seems like a kind of redundancy, but I'm seeking redundancy. The second movement, in a sense, is more obvious, but still necessary. It's to recognize that school teachers are the first, the primary educators of future teachers, of future generations of teachers. Of course, needless to say, many other actors are necessary. In scientific disciplines, in pedagogical disciplines, in university, in research, in science, of course. But professional education, by definition, takes places within a profession. It's like was said by the brilliant teacher education, one of the most brilliant books about teacher education, wrote in France 40 years ago by Gilles Ferry, that opened with this. It should be not necessary to say that teacher education is professional education, is education for a profession, but still we need to say it. And it was a brilliant book wrote in 1987, if I'm not wrong. Teachers, that's why teachers cannot be seen only as assistants or supervisors of practicums, of internships, as assistants of university professors. That's a mistake. They must be considered in their own right, the primary educators of their future colleagues. Because it's impossible to educate a professional without debate inside the profession, experience, socialization within the profession. This is not about defending a kind of a practical term or an instrumental vision of teacher education. No, it is not. No, it is not. Because to speak about the profession is not to speak about practice. Don't confuse the concept of profession with the concept of practice. A profession is symbolic, is theoretical, is reflective, is collective, is cultural, is political, is ideological, is social. All these dimensions are inside the concept of a profession. And so it is necessary to experience this life, this atmosphere, this ambience, its condition, its history, its reality, to build education, to build training with peers, to enrich training at the same time as we are enriching the profession. And this is my point. To enrich the teacher education at the same time that we are enriching the profession and the professional culture. It is in this context that new possibilities will come for improving teaching profession through teacher education, and this is probably my main point in this talk. Third movement, building a third space, the common home of schools and universities, the common home of the profession and the teacher education. Because to implement the two previous movements, valuing a third type of knowledge and strengthening a third actor, it's necessary to build a third space. And this space is not a mere articulation or partnership between schools and universities. It needs to be conceived. It needs to be built as an institutional space with its own structure, with its own organization, with its own power, if you want to use this word. The creation of this third space implies profound changes in universities and in schools, creating a kind of a third reality with autonomy, with its own rules, building a new context for education. A context characterized by the professional culture of teachers, by process of experimentation and innovation, by an intimate link between science and pedagogy, experience, reflection, life histories, collective cultures. There are many, we know, there are many experiences of this kind in the world. But they are still fragile. They are still isolated. They are still punctual cases. They have not yet given rise to a third moment, to a third revolution in teacher education, the revolution that I'm trying to argue for in this talk. Personally, let me just give you 2 or 3 minutes of my own personal experience. Personally, I had the opportunity to work on a project of this kind in Brazil, based on an initiative of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and the State of Rio de Janeiro, through the creation of what they have called the Teacher Education Complex in 2017, which is now fully operational. It's now working, it's fully operational, and is doing a tremendous job for teacher education in the state of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And now, since last year, yes, I'm involved in a similar project in Minas Gerais, also in Brazil, and I remember that the state of Minas Gerais is only one state of Brazil, but is from the size of France, so it's a state, but it's a big state, in which the 19 higher education institutions, universities and higher education institutions in charge of teacher education are working together, participating in a project similar to the one in Rio de Janeiro. It is a much more ambitious project that aims to reconfigure institutional policies and public teacher education throughout the creation of a common home for teacher education and for the teaching profession. Casa comum da formação e da profissão. Common home for teacher education and the teaching profession. In summary, I believe that these three movements are necessary to open a new perspective for teacher education, a new time for teacher education. Of course, it's necessary to avoid the idea that teacher education is the beginning of everything. That any change, any revolution in education begins with teacher education. It's necessary to avoid this idea. It's not. It's not. But at the same time, we cannot deny the importance of teacher education for the production of the profession, for the creation of a more favorable condition for the profession, for the construction of a space which is an institutional space, but it's also a political space, it's a public space that influences public opinion and public policies. Because we will not overcome the current difficulties of the profession without having with us a strong focus on the public opinion and on public policies. From such a space, as it was the case for the normal schools in the 19th century, it's possible to imagine process of induction, of continuous training, of professional development of teachers, new ways of publicizing, of making public the profession and embracing the future, the plurality of futures that are in front of us. I end, dear colleagues and friends, I end as I began. We are experiencing a profound transformation of education and teaching, with immense consequences for the teaching profession. Much of the anxiety teachers feel stems from present uncertainties, from present insecurities and doubts about the future. What are teachers for? What are teachers for? This question has been asked and has been answered countless times. I would venture now to add another answer to this question: what are teachers for? And my answer is, they are for liberating the future. Liberating the future of children, liberating the future of societies. They serve, we serve, to expand the possibilities of the future. They serve, we serve, to open paths and to change destinies. The school is one of the few, perhaps the only institution we have left to build a common world, to try to have a convivial society, to live together, to have a full democracy with human rights. But in order for teachers to be able to fulfill this mission, to liberate the future, it's necessary to liberate the futures of the teachers themselves. To liberate the futures of the teachers themselves. It's necessary to give the teachers the conditions that allow them to assert their position on a professional and public level. And I insist and underline the idea of the public level. To give the profession a future horizon, special attention, in my opinion, must be paid to teacher education. Current solutions are exhaustive. The third revolution will only happen if we have the boldness to think beyond existing limits and borders, sustaining the importance of valuing a third type of knowledge, a third actor, and a third space in teacher education. How to do that? Maybe the best solution is to look at the countless experiences that already exist around the world, giving to these countless experiences visibility, sharing them, building them as a transformative movement. And that was the end of the UNESCO report on the future of education. We say at the end, this is not a report, this is an invitation for the educators in the world to share what they are doing, to build what they are doing as a kind of a transformative movement. We need more than ever the courage of beginnings with freedom. That freedom, according to a French philosopher, Vladimir Jankelevich, a freedom that never exists, neither before nor after. He said, freedom only exists during the action, during the moment of action, because the freedom of teachers, in our case, is more than free. The freedom of teachers is liberating, liberating energies, liberating people, liberating societies, liberating futures. That's why teachers are really irreplaceable, and we say that once and once again in our report at UNESCO. Maybe it's possible to have learning machines. Maybe it's possible. But it will not be possible. It's impossible to have education machines. Because education is a human gesture, because education is a relation, because education is made between humans. And as the Brazilian educator, an extraordinary person, Darcy Ribeiro, wrote it 30 years ago, teachers, he said, continue to be the nerve and the muscle of education. I like very much this metaphor of Darcy Ribeiro. Therefore, as written in the UNESCO report, is necessary to give teachers a prominent role in the construction of the new social contract for education. A prominent role for the construction of this new social contract, and that's why we need to recover the great humanistic mission of teachers. Here is the sentence which I want to end this talking. Thank you very much for your invitation and for your attention. Let us recover the great humanistic mission of teachers with the new conception of teacher education. Thank you.
Thank you very much.